Inter-rebel conflict started during the Syrian civil war after fighting erupted between the Syrian opposition groups, Free Syrian Army, the Army of Mujahideen and the Islamic Front, and the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. In early January 2014, serious clashes between the groups erupted in the north of the country. Opposition groups near Aleppo attacked militants from the ISIS in two areas, Al-Ateb and Andana, which are both strongholds of the fundamentalist Sunni organization. Despite the conflict between ISIS and other rebels, some factions of ISIS have cooperated with the Al-Nusra Front and the Green Battalion to combat Hezbollah in the Kalamoun region. Background: tension between moderate rebels and ISIS had been high since ISIS attacked and captured the FSA-held border town of Izaz in northern Aleppo and the nearby Bab al-Hawa border crossing with Turkey, which serves as an important supply route for rebel forces. This took place between 18 September 23, 2013. The conflict was renewed over Izaz in early October and in late November ISIS captured the border town of Atem from an FSA brigade. On December 31, 2013, the body of Dr. and Hossein Suleiman was handed over in a prisoner swap between ISIS and rival rebel forces. Suleiman was tortured and died in ISIS custody. The opposition National Coalition and activists accused ISIS of serving the interests of the Syrian government by tarnishing the image of their uprising. Open warfare, start of the rebel offensive, ISIS counter-offensive and mutual advances. On the evening of January 2, 2014, ISIS forces attacked the rebel-held town of Atarib, where they were accused of two recent incidents of killing or kidnapping mainstream rebel commanders. On January 3, several civilian protests, counting hundreds of people, were organized against ISIS and to commemorate the death of Suleiman across Aleppo Governorate. In the Idlib village of Kafr Takarim, ISIS opened fire on the protesters. There were no reports of casualties. In response to the attack on the protesters, two newly formed Islamist rebel groups of the FSA attacked ISIS positions in more than half a dozen locations in the governorates of Aleppo and Idlib. Rebels in Atarib managed to repel the ISIS attack on the town, after which the ISIS fighters were surrounded, resulting in the capture of a Tunisian commander, Abu Saber al-Tunisi. It was unclear if he was summarily executed by the rebels. 42 ISIS fighters were wounded in the fighting in Atarib, while an opposition media activist was killed while covering the clashes. There were unconfirmed reports of rebels arresting ISIS members in various towns and villages in Aleppo Governorate and Idlib Governorate. Fighting raged in the Idlib village of Marat Misrin, while in the village of Kafr Nabil rebel forces surrounded an ISIS facility, giving its fighters 24 hours to surrender. Meanwhile, the rebel Islamic Front, which was also engaged in the fighting against ISIS, sent reinforcements to the ISIS-held town of Izaz. On January 4, ISIS were reported to be rounding up suspect activists in both Sirak and Kafr Nabil. In the Harim area, ISIS forces executed 30 captives, including civilians, after their base was surrounded by rebel forces. In Aleppo, fighting raged throughout the province, with rebel forces making advances against ISIS. FSA units were reportedly making progress in Atarib, but ISIS was surrounding the town and shelling it. ISIS was also on the offensive, attacking rebel positions and ambushing their forces in attacks that left 24 rebels dead. One attack included a car bomb. At this point, ISIS gave a 24-hour ultimatum to rebel forces attacking them, saying that they would withdraw from Aleppo, allowing government forces to enter rebel territory, if they did not stop their attacks. The rebels reiterated an earlier call on ISIS fighters to defect to their side. On January 5, rebels captured an ISIS base in Manbij after heavy fighting. Clashes had also erupted in the town of Tabqa, in Araku Qah Governorate, and fighting spread to the central Hama Governorate where ISIS killed 7 rebel fighters. During the fighting in Manbij, ISIS used car bombs to defend its territory. Meanwhile, ISIS forces retreated from Al-Dana and Atmin Idlib Governorate and started heading in the direction of Aleppo. their positions were taken over by the Al-Nusra Front and Ahrar ash-Sham groups, in a possible deal to avoid larger confrontations. ISIS also retreated from Derat Izzah, while they managed to retain control of Sirak and Kafr Zita. ISIS reinforcements were dispatched from Raqqa to Aleppo. Overall, 66 combatants, including 11 ISIS fighters, were killed during the day. According to the opposition Sham News Network, by this point, rebels had captured more than 80% of the ISIS-held Idlib countryside and 65% of ISIS territory in Aleppo and its countryside. By January 6, rebels had besieged ISIS in its stronghold of Raqqa. During the fighting, rebels released 50 prisoners from ISIS custody. Among those rescued was a Turkish news photographer who had been kidnapped since December 2013. 10 Syrian Kurdish prisoners also managed to escape. 70 ISIS and 20 rebel fighters had been killed since the rebel attack on Raqqa started, according to a rebel officer who expected that it would take them at least a week to drive the al-Qaeda-linked militants out of the city. Meanwhile, ISIS detonated a car bomb by a rebel checkpoint near the town of Darkush. 20 rebel fighters were killed in the suicide attack on the checkpoint. ISIS fighters retreated from Kafr Zita, in Jarablus, a mile and a half from the Turkish-Syrian border. There were conflicting reports with the Islamic Front stating they had overrun the local ISIS headquarters, with the ISIS denying that and insisting that the group was holding fast. On January 7, it was confirmed that 34 foreign ISIS and Jund al-Aqsa fighters had been executed in the previous few days by rebels in the Jabal al-Zawilal area. ISIS retreated from al-Mayadeen in Deir ez-Zor Governorate, without any fighting with rebel forces. East of Ruston, in Homs Governorate, ISIS attacked a rebel headquarters killing 15 rebel fighters. During the day, it was revealed that the previous evening ISIS executed up to 50 prisoners in the Qadi al-Asqar district of Aleppo. The dead included media activists, relief workers and other civilians. According to the opposition SOHR, 42 people were executed, including 21 rebel fighters and 5 media activists. On January 8, rebels captured the ISIS headquarters in Aleppo city at the Children's Hospital in the Qadi Asqar district. ISIS forces lost control over opposition-held areas of the city and retreated to Al-Inzarat on the northeastern outskirts of Aleppo. 300 hostages held by radical jihadists were set free. In Raqqa, the hospital was abandoned, bodies were laying in the central square and there was no power or water, leaving the city completely paralyzed, according to an opposition activist. At this point, ISIS controlled 2 key routes out of Raqqa, to the east toward the Iraqi border and also the road north to the Turkish frontier. The head of the Al-Nusra Front, Abu Muhammad al-Gulani, confirmed that fighting had taken place between his organization and ISIS and called for mediation and an end to the infighting. Late in the day, ISIS started a counterattack as it launched car bomb assaults targeting opposition checkpoints. 3 attacks took place in Al-Bab, Ritan and Jarablus in Aleppo Governorate, Observatory Director Rami Abdelrahman told AFP. He said similar overnight attacks took place in Aleppo Governorate, while one occurred in Mayadeen in the eastern Deir ez-Zor Governorate. The attack in Al-Bab killed 9 people. On January 9, ISIS sent reinforcements from Deir ez-Zor to back its fighters in the Aleppo countryside. According to local residents, ISIS was preparing many suicide attacks in retaliation for the rebel attacks, and that their commanders were wearing explosive belts all the time. Dutch journalist Lex Runderkamp told Dutch news program NOS that the ISIS reinforcement convoy was 1,300 men strong, including ISIS special forces from Iraq. In Raqqa, the rebels took control of the political intelligence building, which was located 400 meters from the main ISIS headquarters. However, ISIS still controlled the bridges leading into the city, which left people using boats to get into Raqqa, and later in the evening ISIS forces seized the Mashlab district and an Al-Nusra Front base in the city. Clashes erupted between ISIS and a rebel brigade by the Castillo Road, in Aleppo Governorate. The rebels blocked an ISIS supply route between Al-Jandul and Castillo. Meanwhile, Islamist rebel brigades sent reinforcements to the Bab al-Salama border crossing, at Izaz, which is primarily controlled by ISIS. In Idlib province, ISIS opened fire on a demonstration in Kafat Khurram and besieged several field clinics, and stormed one of them, searching for rebels injured earlier in the morning during clashes in Atarib. According to SOHR, local ISIS forces signed a truce with the Islamic Front and several independent Islamist rebel units in Al-Hasaka Governorate. They agreed with the establishment of a single military command center and legal authority for the area. On January 10, ISIS managed to push back rebel forces on the eastern approaches to Arareku-Qah. ISIS forces also killed 20 rebel fighters in fighting in the town of Al-Bab in Aleppo province, and managed to capture wheat silos and mills just outside the town. ISIS commander Abu Omar al-Shishani entered the town with a convoy of 30 vehicles and troops after he lifted the ISIS's siege of Dur al-Zor airport. On January 11, rebels moved a convoy including tanks and technicals to Saraik in preparation to push ISIS out. Heavy fighting erupted and it was reported that rebels took over most of the town, and besieged hundreds of ISIS fighters. Earlier in the day, 5 rebels were killed on the outskirts of Saraik when their car hit a bomb. Meanwhile, ISIS forces managed to capture the border town of Tal Ebiad, while in Arareku-Qah ISIS fighters captured a rebel checkpoint and the train station. ISIS fighters also dumped the corpses of dozens of their foes at the village of Jazra, to the west of Arareku-Qah. Dozens of bodies of ISIS fighters were also reportedly in Arareku-Qah's hospital. Rebels managed to regain territory lost in previous days in Aleppo province and were defending against ISIS counterattacks. 20 rebels were killed in fighting in the town of Anadan, while 30 rebels were killed in 3 days of fighting in the village of Al-Tiba, northeast of Sekhna. On January 12, it was confirmed that rebel forces had captured the eastern part of Saraik with the local ISIS commander surrounded with his fighters in the center of the town. Fighting was still continuing in Arareku-Qah between ISIS and remnants of rebel units, including the Al-Nusra Front, although by this point ISIS had captured much of the city. According to an opposition activist, 95% of Arareku-Qah and its countryside were under ISIS control. ISIS forces had also captured the towns of Ritan and Basratan in Aleppo province. It was also reported that the bodies of 70 rebels were delivered to Arareku-Qah's hospital after they were executed by ISIS following their capture of Tal Ebiad. Another report put the number of executed prisoners at 100. On January 13, it was reported that ISIS had won the battle for Arareku-Qah, capturing most of the province and the provincial capital. ISIS had also captured Al-Bab and Bazair, while the rebels were gaining ground in Jarablus, near the Turkish border. Another mass execution of prisoners was also reported near the village of Kantari, about 80 kilometers north of Arareku-Qah, when ISIS killed 46 captured fighters of the Ar-Sham rebel group. 14 rebels were also executed in Homs province. On January 14, it was reported that rebels captured the villages of Muskan, Kafr Kalban and Kafra in Aleppo province, while the ISIS has taken full control of Arareku-Qah city, after the last remaining rebels retreated. Meanwhile, the rebels also captured the prison in Jarablus, releasing 70 prisoners from ISIS custody. On January 15, an ISIS car bomb in Jarablus killed 26 people, of which 23 were rebel fighters and 3 were civilians. Meanwhile, in Saraik fighting was continuing and opposition sources reported that the local ISIS commander, a Belgian, was killed. ISIS denied the claim. Between 15 and 17 January, rebels captured Jibrain, Hardenton Kfaraks, Sheikh Ali, Al-Arjal, 46th Base, Oram al-Sura and Reef al-Muhandizin, while the ISIS retreated from the village of Kafarjum, which holds the largest ISIS arms depots in all of Syria. ISIS also withdrew from Sirte, burning their vehicles as they retreated, while at the same time ISIS recaptured Jarablus. On January 20, 2 suicide cars exploded at the Bab al-Halwa border crossing. 16 people including 6 rebels were killed. The same day, ISIS forces seized control of the Al-Jarrah military airport. In Manbij, a large suicide car explosion killed 20 people, including rebels, women, and children. By January 23, ISIS was in full control of Manbij and completely secured Darkush the following day. On January 27, it was reported that ISIS senior commander Samir Abid Muhammad el-Halfori was killed by rebels in Tal Rifat, near Izes, and at least 2 other ISIS senior commanders were captured at Riton. 4 ISIS fighters and 3 rebels were killed in the fighting. ISIS confirmed the death of top ISIS leader Haji Bakr on February 2. Al-Qaeda breaks links with ISIS and al-Nusra Front joins the fight. On February 1, ISIS attacked the headquarters of the Liwa al-Tawhid Brigade in Aleppo, killing the brigade commander Adnan Bakr and 15 other rebels at the cost of at least 9 ISIS fighters. The next day, Al-Qaeda distanced itself from ISIS and its actions in Syria. On February 3, the RRAQQAH Rebels Brigade launched a military operation against ISIS checkpoints and strongholds in RRAQQAH. The day before, 5 ISIS fighters were assassinated in the RRAQQA National Hospital. On February 5, a local group of Suqar al-Sham Brigade in Hama and ISIS signed a truce. It was also reported that the Front of Aleppo Islamic scholars issued a statement, giving the ISIS fighters in Syria a 3-day ultimatum to either return to Iraq or join other armed factions fighting against the Syrian regime. On February 8, the al-Nusra Front and allied rebel factions launched an offensive against the ISIS in the Dur az-Zor Governorate. It was reported that the ISIS emir of Dur al-Zor, Abu Dujana, was killed in the clashes and the rebels also recaptured facilities in the province. At the same time, 13 foreign ISIS fighters defected in RRAQQA. Between 10th and 12th February, ISIS had almost completely withdrawn from the eastern province of Dur az-Zor, including the city of Dur az-Zor. On February 23, 2 ISIS suicide bombers killed a number of rebels in Aleppo, including Abu Khaled al-Suri, who was al-Qaeda's representative in Syria and top commander in the rebel group Ar-Sham. 3 days later, the Tunisian ISIS deputy emir for the RRAQQA province and 3 other fighters were killed by a roadside bomb, while rebels captured the village of Kafnaya in Aleppo. It was also reported that ISIS released a rebel commander in RRAQQA. On February 28, it was reported that ISIS has begun retreating from the following places in Aleppo province towards RRAQQA, Izes, Menal Military Airport, the Maya region and the villages of Dujamal and Kafin. ISIS has regrouped in particular at their strongholds Jarablus and Manbij. Izes was captured by rebels after the ISIS withdrawal. Ongoing clashes, ISIS retreats from Idlib and Latakia. On March 3, SOHR reported that ISIS was responsible for the kidnapping of the commander of the rebel OE United Front for Southern Damascus in February 2014. On March 11, ISIS massacred at least 22 people, including 12 rebels, after they captured the village of Suaq near Jarablus. During this time, ISIS had also captured the town of Karakozak, in Aleppo province near the Turkish border. The next day, the ISIS emir Abu Muhammad al-Masri was assassinated by the FSA-affiliated LRAQQA Revolutionaries Brigade in the RRAQQA's Taldekan area, near the village of Zareen. On March 14, it was reported that ISIS fully retreated from Idlib and Latakia provinces. On March 16, according to local sources, a number of foreign ISIS fighters defected to al-Nusra after they killed their commander. The next day, al-Nusra and the Islamic Front were able to capture the Al-Thalja barrier, resulting in the ISIS withdrawal towards Maghada town. On March 27, ISIS launched an operation against al-Nusra and Allied forces at the Al-Jafra oil field and the Conoco gas factory in Reef Durazol. SOHR confirmed that the ISIS took hold of these facilities, but were forced to withdraw after heavy clashes 2 days later. On March 29, ISIS captured the town of Markadar, after the rebels retreated to Al-Sor town in the eastern countryside of Deir ez-Zor. At least 35 rebels were reportedly killed by the ISIS in the fighting and many rebels were captured. The SOHR confirmed the death of at least 7 ISIS fighters. ISIS's Deir ez-Zor offensive. On April 10, ISIS launched a three-pronged assault on rebel positions in and near the border town of Al-Bukamal. The ISIS reportedly took parts of the town, the silos near the town and Kabejb. The bodies of 10 rebel fighters, allegedly executed by ISIS, were found at 2 different sites in Camel, with more reports of the summary executions of rebels by the ISIS in the area according to the SOHR. A counterattack by al-Nusra Front and its allies was reported the same day involving the Qadisiyah Brigade and the Omar al-Mukhtar brigades against ISIS positions. On April 11, the number of dead on both sides was raised to 86, including the brother of the ISIS emir in Al-Bukamal and the judge of a Sharia committee. On April 11, Jabhat al-Nusra and Islamic battalions bolstered by reinforcements regained control of Abu Kamal after the ISIS was pushed out of occupied districts in less than a few hours after the takeover. ISIS pulled out to the T2 oil station on the outskirts of the city. Most of its checkpoints in the area were also removed. The SOHR confirmed the executions of 7 rebel fighters belonging to the Islamic battalion during the seizure of the oil station the previous day. 27 ISIS fighters were killed in the second day of fighting, with the rebel death toll rising to 60. 3 Islamic fighters were also killed battling ISIS positions in the north, along with 1 killed in Markada. On April 13, fighting in the Camel area subsided as ISIS retreated to the town of Hussein. Heavy clashes were reported with rebels as ISIS made territorial gains in the north, capturing several villages previously held by the rebels. On April 16, rebels pulled away from North Deir ez-Zor while ISIS was pushed out of a city in the south, leaving 13 ISIS fighters dead. The same day, ISIS assassinated al-Nusra emir in Idlib province, Abu Muhammad al-Ansari. 4 ISIS fighters were said to have entered his house, assassinating the commander and murdering his entire family. According to the SOHR, al-Nusra rebels were alerted clashing with ISIS, leaving the entire suicide team dead along with 1 rebel fighter. By April 26, according to rebel source, some 1,500 rebels were engaged in an offensive in Raqqa province, trying to push towards the city of Raqqa. The same source claimed that the rebels took at least 5 villages. On May 1, rebels reportedly captured the town of Al-Bisir as well as the mountain of Al-Bisir from the ISIS. The next day, ISIS fighters took the Abra village from the rebels, but the rebels recaptured it 2 days later. More than 60,000 civilians have reportedly fled from towns and villages in Deir ez-Zor province due to the clashes between the rebels and ISIS. That day, the al-Nusra Front announced that it will stop fighting ISIS as soon as the ISIS will stop its attacks on Muslims. On May 5, 69 rebels and local gunmen were killed in clashes against ISIS in Deir ez-Zor, while at least 23 ISIS fighters were killed, as well as 5 civilians, including the governor of the province. The Al-Soba village was reportedly taken by the rebels. On May 8, ISIS arrested hundreds of people in Deir ez-Zor under suspicion of having family members among the rebels, and 20 of them were allegedly executed. Meanwhile, ISIS captured the villages of Al-Tabia, Al-Kesra and Mar Ali in the province. More than 20 rebels were killed in the clashes. Several ISIS fighters were also killed. On May 10, ISIS took complete control of western Reef Deir ez-Zor. From April 30 until May 10, 230 fighters and several civilians were killed in the clashes between the al-Nusra Front and ISIS in the governorate of Deir ez-Zor, according to the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights. 146 of the dead combatants were those who fought against ISIS. On May 11, an opposition source stated that since the start of the conflict 2,000 rebel fighters had been killed fighting against ISIS and 2,850 were wounded. From 10 to May 11, ISIS was said to have gained control of important parts of eastern Deir ez-Zor province and districts of Deir ez-Zor city from rival rebel forces, opposition sources reported. ISIS reportedly executed multiple FSA fighters at a checkpoint in Al Hassan village in Deir ez-Zor province on May 11. On May 13, ISIS reportedly gained control of at least 5 villages in the northern countryside of Al-Araqqa province after battles with rebels. 14 rebel fighters were reported killed in the clashes. ISIS was said to have executed the military commander of the Al-Araqqa rebel brigade and his nephew near Ayanissa in Al-Araqqa province. On May 16, ISIS launched a suicide attack on a rebel brigade's headquarters in Ash-Sharil town in Deir ez-Zor province. 14 people, mostly rebel fighters, were reported killed in the attack. Reports suggested that ISIS executed by beheading in Hama province a prominent brigade commander of the Islamic Front, Abu Muqaddam, who was known for destroying regime tanks. By late May, 3,000 ISIS fighters were involved in the offensive in Deir ez-Zor. On May 22, ISIS was reported to have gained control of Al-Karat oil terminal in Deir ez-Zor province. 26 al-Nusra and rebel fighters were killed in the fighting. ISIS was said to have captured 5 oil stations in the Deir ez-Zor countryside since the beginning of opposition in fighting. On June 2 in Deir ez-Zor ISIS took full control of al-Bajra while at the same time the rebels counterattacked, reclaiming 16 villages. On June 5, ISIS gained control of the entire western countryside of Deir ez-Zor after al-Nusra forces withdrew following an assault by Chechen and Afghan ISIS fighters. On June 8, the FSA reportedly assassinated the ISIS emir of Homs. By June 10, the offensive into Deir ez-Zor had expanded and ISIS had reportedly driven al-Nusra and aligned militants from nearly all of the province north of the Euphrates. According to SOHR, the violence since mid-May led to the death of 241 ISIS fighters and 354 rebels. ISIS also captured 4 oil fields. On June 20, ISIS captured 3 towns in Deir ez-Zor near a major military base. Since the start of the offensive, the pace of defections from the opposition to ISIS has accelerated, most significantly in the town of Al-Muazzan and adjacent villages, where a mass defection by the rebel garrison granted ISIS uncontested control over a key route to the provincial capital. Over 21 and 22 June, ISIS captured 8 towns in the northern part of Aleppo Governorate, with the help of American-made Humvees seized in Iraq. 2 of the towns were located near the town of Izaz on the border with Turkey. On June 25, the local unit of al-Nusra in Al-Bukamal on the Iraqi border pledged loyalty to ISIS. Between January 3 and June 28, 5,641 6,991 people had been killed in the inter-rebel fighting. By February 25, ISIS had conducted 34 suicide attacks. On June 29, ISIS executed and publicly crucified 8 rebel fighters in Aleppo province. On July 1, ISIS, bolstered by reinforcements from Iraq, routed rebels from Al-Bukamal after days of fighting with opposition forces led by al-Nusra. ISIS began advancing towards al-Nusra's stronghold, Shuhal, also reported to be the hometown of its leader, al-Ghalani. On July 2, opposition sources reported that the rebel militia Islam Army expelled ISIS fighters from the Fouta town Maida in Damascus province. On July 3, ISIS took control of the towns of Mayadin and Shal in Deir ez-Zor province after al-Nusra fighters withdrew. ISIS gained control of Syria's largest oil field, Al-Omar in Deir ez-Zor province, after al-Nusra forces fled the facility. By this point, the entirety of the province with the exception of the provincial capital, its airport, and a few villages had fallen to ISIS. Following this, ISIS captured the villages of Kunia and Buqris, close to the town of Mayadin. On July 14, ISIS expelled Nusra and other assorted rebel groups from all rebel-controlled neighborhoods in Deir ez-Zor city. By this stage, SOHR reported that ISIS controlled 95 to 98% of Deir ez-Zor province. East Fouta clashes. On July 1, clashes erupted between Jaish al-Islam and ISIS in the eastern Fouta town of Medawa. ISIS captured 25 of their fighters and executed an unknown number of them. On July 2, Zoran Alash, the Army of Islam's leader, gave an impassioned speech to his followers, deriding ISIS and listing several of their atrocities. On the same day, Army of Islamic claimed to have expelled ISIS from Medawa after a costly battle that led to the deaths of 14 fighters and claimed 15 ISIS casualties. On July 9, opposition sources reported that a key commander of Jaish al-Islam, Abu Muhammad Harun, was assassinated by IS after his car was destroyed by a roadside bomb in the Fouta suburbs. Following the ISIS victory in Deir ez-Zor, it was reported that the entirety of Dawald Brigade, a 1,000-strong division of the Islamic Front member Suqar al-Sham defected to ISIS. The defection of Dawald is reported to have bolstered ISIS forces in RAQQA with more than 100 combat vehicles, at least 10 of them tanks. On July 21, SOHR reported that al-Nusra Front seized a town from the HAZZM movement in Idlib Governorate. Therefore, HAZZM movement said that it would no longer work with al-Nusra Front. Attempted mediation. On January 19, ISIS reached out to other rebel groups in Syria to stop the rebel infighting, by posting an audio message online. On April 4, Al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri called on the rival jihadists and rebels to end the infighting, stating that the violence is a sedition. In early May, Ayman al-Zawahiri again called on ISIS and the al-Nusra Front to stop their fighting. However, fighting continued between the two groups. The al-Nusra Front issued a statement on May 4, 2014 in which it agreed to stop fighting with ISIS, however, it stated that it will retaliate if ISIS attacks first. In May 2014 ISIS launched an offensive against al-Nusra and allied groups in Deir ez-Zor Governorate, seizing oil wells and leaving hundreds dead on both sides. References